Okay, going for a take. Take two. Action.
Part two. After a very, very interesting part one,
Yeah.
it's on to you. I wanted to ask you this question. It was the first question I wrote down when I was in my house thinking about what to ask you. And it came into my head, and I just was like, oh, I bet you've got an interesting answer for it. So I wanted to ask this: why do you write?
So I can work. No, that's the quick answer. Why do I write? I think I always wrote as a kid, like short stories and whatever, and then was like sort of had that moment of like, right, I want to be an actor, and sort of didn't think about it again for ages. And like a lot of things in my life, it sort of happened by accident, but I love it. I think looking like at my sort of journey to being an actor, I think for me now looking back, it's like always inevitable that I would have been a writer as well, because anytime I get a script, my approach is always quite analytical and literary first, and looking at the words. And I just feel like my degree, I got an English, like my degree's in English literature. It's not, I didn't go to drama school. Like it's an English literature degree. I love a book. So the first thing I properly wrote was 2019 with my theatre company with Switch. We were doing a play. It was devised and I was directing it. I'd always enjoyed directing, but we essentially needed to put everything that everyone had devised into a script and needed someone to script it. And I was like, oh, well, I could give it a go. So myself and Andy Long, who is like a collaborator of mine, we do a lot of writing together, sat and wrote it. And I was like, oh my God, this is so fun. I can decide what people say. But also like in a more deep way, like I feel it's so interesting, like just understanding how a story's structured. So I feel like why do I write is, I think it feeds my yearn to be a storyteller. It also fills those gaps as an actor where you're not working, and allows me to still feel like I'm stretching that muscle and understanding stories. But I like absolutely categorically know it's made me a better actor. It's made me a better director, and vice versa. Like the more I act, the more I feel like I understand what works for me when I get a script and what grabs me, and then that feeds my work as a writer. And I go, okay, well, so I feel like all of the stuff that I like as a writer, director and actor, always a bit of my brain is on, well, what would thrill me as, like if I make a choice as an actor, what would make me happy as a director if an actor made that choice? And then as a director, I'm like, okay, if I got a script, what would make me really excited? Or if I'm an actor, like if I got a script, what would make me go, yeah, I want to do this? So I feel like I do all three with sort of the idea in my head of, okay, well, what would excite me in the other two roles?
And you did that, didn't you, for Ollie's Diary?
Yeah, I wrote my own little mini. That was also like I think a lot of my careers come from being a bit cheeky and going, well, what's the worst there? They can just say no. What's the worst that can happen? Yeah, I wrote a mini series for Hollyoaks and like sat in on the writers' room, and that was like sort of towards the end of my time on the show. And I like, being on a soap, like it's a full-time job. You're there every day. So it was less like going into an environment where I felt I was more rigid. To like after a while, I felt, okay, I'm very comfortable. I know these people. So I just sent an email. I was like, there was a particular episode where my character Ollie got a video camera that his dad had in the past. In the storyline, my dad had dementia, and it was a way of connecting with his dad. And then he started making, just in this one episode, he like filmed some bits. And so for me, I used to love growing up watching like little mini-sodes or getting you'd find like DVD extras and there'd be an extra scene.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh my God, like there's an extra bit of something I love. And like they used to always do it with Doctor Who. They'd have like little mini-sodes before an episode and you could watch it on YouTube. And it was like just this expansion of a show that you enjoyed. And Hollyoaks have done it loads in the past. They've done loads of like little mini-series, Hollyoaks like later and things on YouTube. So I thought, well, I could do one. And so that was all I thought at first. And then I'd like chatted to someone on set and I was like, well, I've got this video camera in this episode. And then it just disappears because it's just used for this one episode. But I feel like the character would keep it. So I just wrote a message to the digital team and was like, I've got this idea. I think it'd be really interesting to see a bit of Ollie's life and him documenting what it's like having a dad with dementia. And they loved it. And also it meant that I'd done a bit of the work for them. And then we reached out to this charity that we'd been working with the storyline. So I had a meeting with them and was connected with some like young people who had parents with dementia. And then it sort of snowballed and became a bit of a bigger thing. And then suddenly I was like speaking to like producers on the show about it, and was sitting in the writer's room. But it was lovely. I ended up coming out with like the opportunity to write for my own character, and we like took it really far. We were like filming in Mallorca for some of the storyline, and it became this thing of going, have you got a script? Have you got a script for this scene? And it was brilliant. Like, it was exactly like that though. It was like, oh, I'll just write a little bit for today. And because it was meant to be like this dead grainy old video camera, we didn't really need a big crew. So I was able to produce it, direct it, because I would just be like one person from digital, but then like bring in other cast members as well. So I was saying to them, oh, do you want to do this episode? We had like a bit of time in between scenes, and we could just go upstairs in a set and film it. And then it became this really lovely opportunity to like expand on the role for me and for the audience, and just for me as a writer, like get to see a little bit more into the life of a character, particularly on a soap where everything's so fast moving. Have moments that you would never usually have had of two characters sitting down and just talking for 3 minutes, which is the acting that I love doing. I always feel like the juiciest, best acting is just people in a room talking. And that gave me the opportunity to do it.
Would you like to get more into writing, or would you like?
Yeah, I love it.
Are there any other stuff that you're writing at the moment, or?
There's tons. So I did, about a year and a half ago, Andy, who I'd co-written this other show with, we co-wrote a play called The Other Side, a horror. We essentially like flipped a coin. We were like, what's the two hardest things to write, comedy or horror? I think, because they're the only two genres that require a vocal response from your audience. Anything else, your audience can sort of sit back. You're like, maybe they're enjoying it, maybe they're not. If they don't laugh and it's a comedy, you failed. And if your audience don't go, "Hoo," and it's a horror, you failed. So we thought, well, let's set ourselves a really high challenge, and it'll be one or the other. So we flipped a coin, and it was horror. So we wrote this horror play, and it was very luckily like really well received. So we're gonna hopefully next year take it on tour around the Northwest. So we've like slightly rewritten that, but I've adapted it for TV. So I'm working on a new draft of the pilot at the moment for that, which it's been really exciting, like taking a pre-existing property and going, okay, how would it exist in a different medium? So I'm working on that. I'm working on a solo show at the moment, and a play about a woman who goes missing, and her two sons get to a point where they think they've moved on, and they've had a funeral without a body, and then she comes home and they don't know if she's real or not. And she was working on this technology. It's a sci-fi, because I also thought, like, what's the hardest genre to put on stage? I think it's sci-fi, because it's the most high concept thing. It's the most like sort of experimental genre, and needs a lot of money, and theatre has no money. So I wanted to challenge myself as a writer of, okay, well, how can I put my favourite genre, but also a genre that I feel matches quite poorly with theatre, and put those two together. So she was experimenting with this technology where if your loved one dies unexpectedly, you can get them back for a day and say goodbye to an AI version of them when you sort of feed all your digital decks. I thought so much of my life is online now.
Yeah.
You could so accurately recreate me, the pattern that I talk in, especially like being on TV, like you've got my voice, like we were talking about before, like you've got like we're all actors. There's so much of our voice, our face, our physicality is out there that actually, if the technology was good enough, would you know that I was actually Gabriel Clark, or could I might be in bed right now and asleep, and I've just sent a robot version of myself to come and talk about Alien and act it. But I thought, like, well, that's a really interesting concept that's easy to put on stage, because it's all like Westworld, like the sort of robots where they look real on the surface, and the only way to know is to kill them. So it's sort of about that, and like how they start to work out whether this is actually their mum or not, and whether they can be happy that their mum's not dead, or is someone playing a horrendous joke.
Quite psychological as well.
Yeah, I love a good psychology. I just love people talking, and I feel like sci-fi and people sat in a room chatting and slowly going mad that's my idea of a perfect night out.
Cool.
What do you think? I mean, like we met like once or twice maybe. So like getting to know you has basically just been this chat. Like my concept of you, super smart, super creative, just like imagination, just like tendrils like popping out all over here. Where do you think that all came from? Like this urge to write as a kid, like you were saying before?
I genuinely think being a nerd is the best thing ever. Like I grew up in quite a like free, creative family. My mum's an opera singer, my dad's in a band, so I've grown up in quite like a liberal, creative space. And I also like I've grown up around stories. Like my family, I'm half Italian, half English, and when my nonno came over to England, like when we were younger, like his English wasn't amazing, so a lot of how we communicated was watching Mr. Bean, because it's completely like non-verbal. It's just, but it's pure storytelling still, but it's not dialogue. So it was able, like we were able to connect through watching that. And but also, like, I've got a massive family, like they're Italian, so they're Catholic, so there's no condoms, so there's just a lot of them. And because of that, there's a lot of like competition and like people trying to be heard around the table and telling stories. So I've always been around storytellers, but for me, like the thing that I think really sparked my imagination was being the perfect age when Doctor Who came back in 2005, and being like my dad had watched it growing up, so he was like, right, you've got to watch this. And then like the Star Wars prequels coming out, so like just being that age as like a sort of like around 10, 11, where you're starting to get your own tastes, but also you're still watching what your parents tell you. And you're like, my cousins loved Star Wars, so I would watch it because I wanted to be cool like them. And I was just having my eyes completely like opened and my brain blown up to this world of sci-fi where there's no rules, there's no right or wrong, like anything can happen. And also I think like being queer as well, and like feeling very different in school, and having a hero on TV who wasn't hyper heterosexual, who didn't use violence, who used words, but also was very different, but was like that difference was celebrated and was front and center in the show and in Doctor Who. But I think a lot of sci-fi, like the central characters are outsiders and are weirdos, and that's how I felt a lot growing up. So I think for me, like connecting to science fiction as a genre where anything felt possible, where like, you know, that these potential futures, that it was liberatory spaces of like there's no right or wrong, but therefore you can be queer and be celebrated for it. You can be different and be celebrated for it. And I think that's the beauty of sci-fi. So for me, like having my eyes open to the world of storytelling was having my eyes open to the world of like joy and acceptance and being celebrated for who you are. And that, I guess I sort of feel like I've forgotten what your question was, but
You answered it impeccably.
So when did you like make that transition? When did you get into acting then?
I sort of feel like with most actors, there's probably like two answers of like, there's a slow burn of finding your way into the industry and going, okay, this is definitely what I want to do. And for me, that like, this is definitely what I want to do was when I started doing it professionally, and it stopped being a dream and started being a reality, and going, okay, like understand the practicalities of it, and having that shift from like, wow, I love doing it, wouldn't it be amazing to be paid to do it, and then going, okay, this is my job, how do I navigate it? And, you know, like navigating pay, getting to work, travel, like looking after your mental health, planning what you're going to have for tea, all of those stuff around your dream. And then you start going, okay, well, it's still what I love doing, but now it's not a dream, it's a reality, and I've got to make sure I'm not taken advantage of, and make sure I ask what I'm owed for. And I think the danger with acting is we put it on a pedestal and we say it's our dream job, it's what I love to do, and I'll do anything to do it. And I think as a result of that, there's a reason that actors are paid so terribly a lot of the time, is because people know that, well, it's your dream, so you'll do it for free anyway. I've done loads of work for free. I would still do work for free if the job's amazing and I feel really passionate about it, if I've got the freedom financially to do it at that point. But I think it's so important that we have a conversation as actors about actually knowing our worth and going, yeah, it's what I love to do, but it's still a job. And if you've got an amazing electrician or plumber or whatever, like who like, my dad fixes furniture for a living, he's passionate about that. He's not going to go to someone and go, oh yeah, oh my God, thank you so much for the opportunity to fix your table. I will do it for free. I feel so grateful that you've let me like fix your wiring in your house. Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity. I think it's really nice that I feel grateful for opportunities and that we do as actors, but also I think it's important to like check yourself sometimes and go, actually, like, I've earned this and I've trained for it. I know what I'm doing. I've practiced. You wouldn't trust a complete stranger to come and like plumb your house in the same way that like you wouldn't get anyone off the street to come and be an actor. So I think for me, like when I wanted to be an actor was when I started doing it professionally and knowing, okay, practically this is what I want to do. The more fun answer is since I was a little kid. My mum's an opera singer, so like I grew up around like performance and being on the stage and like wanting to be in those worlds and being at school and like playing Star Wars in the playground, and actors are just people who haven't grown up. So the more fun answer is like, it's the best job ever. I get to play for a living. I get to pretend to be other people and be a kid. Why would you not want to do that? It's just fun. It's like a no-brainer. I can't see myself doing anything else.
And I wanted to riff off that because the knowing your worth bit was struck a real chord in my head, because the thing about acting is it's a constant process, and it's not something where, like, I think of some jobs and you go there, you come out of it, it's over. With acting, it's sort of a constant thing that every day, like everything is part of that environment. Everything you pick up, every small detail that you're talking to someone, like this conversation, you know, this conversation has its purpose now, but it might have its purpose somewhere in the future in your subconscious that might come out. And because it's such a long process that lasts a lifetime, it can take a toll. And when you take too much work without the pay to survive, it's just so unhealthy. And I feel like those boundaries have to be made, because without those boundaries, you can sort of crumble in on yourself and really do more harm to yourself than good. Whereas if you, I don't want to say pick your projects, because that sounds very stush, but if you are selective on your opportunity, or being like, you're willing to do anything, but as long as the conditions are met to some extent, like there's a balance. But I think that's really a really important point to emphasize on.
I think we have to be grateful for the opportunities that we get.
Exactly.
But we also have to remember just how important we are, and just how much power we have.
Yeah.
And not to forget that. You know, there's
So true.
there's a lot of employers and projects that sort of take the piss
Yeah.
out of actors, as you were saying before, because we're eager to work and to take on these opportunities. But I think once we start recognizing and realizing our importance and our power.
Well, look at the pandemic. What did everyone do? What was the one thing that like brought people comfort, that you know, oh, if I'm feeling a bit crap, put something on.
Yeah.
The role that actors have in society as storytellers is so vital. Like, we are the town square. Like, before we had social media and everything, the way you would convey a message was through storytelling. It's the only craft you can trace back to when we were cavemen, is painting like pictures on the walls and telling stories. And I think it's why I would never say like, oh, I'm just an actor, you know, I'm not doing anything important. I think it's so fucking important. With you're like reflecting life as a writer, you're reflecting life as you see it. As an actor, you're reflecting the world as you see it to people and saying, this is how I see the world. And that's never going to get boring. It's never going to get dull. And it's so important, particularly then when you're able to reflect other people on screen and like give people the opportunity to feel seen. And it's the most valuable thing. It can change someone's life. A good story can like
our society is so heavily revolved around entertainment. You know, it's what life is worth living for. Society, for poetry, for art, for passion, for entertainment.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have to remember the importance of that, and our importance of being part of that.
And art is everywhere. Everything is art, and it's everyone's individual interpretation. The story I always like to say is like, when someone asks me like, what made you get into acting in the first place when you were a kid? And the thing I always like to ask is, when you go into the cinema to watch a film, what are you thinking about? The film. You're not thinking about what's going on in your life, what horrible stuff happens to people. You're not thinking about any of that. You're just thinking about what's in front of you. And you, as a collective, and that's the beautiful thing, is people, hundreds of people go into a room together and watch something and cry and laugh and shit themselves if it's Alien, like all of this stuff. It brings people together, and without it, it would be a very boring place to live.
That's so true. And one of my favourite things about that is like, they've done studies, and when theatre audiences sit together, your heartbeats sync. And like, audiences have a synchronized heartbeat. There's something about watching a show and just the power of that, being in a space where everyone's hearts are beating at the same time and having the opportunity to share a story with people is the most exciting. Like, it's why live theatre will never get boring, but also like being in a cinema is just so much better than watching a film at home or like watching it on your phone. There's something about sharing a story collectively. Like, I went to watch Alien on my own, but I wasn't on my own because I was in a room full of people screaming together and going, I was like, I was just like, you make tiny connections and you're never going to see that person again, but for a moment you're sharing something together, and it's the most human act possible.
Have you guys read? It's by Kay Tempest. It's called On Connection.
Yes.
Yes, I've
Because
got that
that's-
a tiny little
It's
book
gorgeous.
with the
Yeah.
beautiful colours.
I
Yes.
think they reference the heartbeat in
Mm.
that. Yeah, highly recommend it. It's a gorgeous little book. Just all about how the main thing that they think is missing in society now is connection, and that they find it through, because obviously they've gone through so much in their life. They talk a little bit about it in the book. It's like maybe 100 pages, like max. And I'm trying to remember it because I think it was the start of this year that I read it. But it was through connection, it was through vulnerability, it was through openness, through this. They talk about it in like a trifecta where I think it's like, might be getting this wrong, but like audience, storyteller, art or whatever, or message or something like that. And through this sort of, and it doesn't have to be the artist, it can just be a person just opening up about who they are, their experiences, their unique interpretation on things, and their imagination, their upbringing. Same reason we do the podcast, just to hear about their unique take. Going for take, good name for a podcast. Yeah, highly recommend it. It's
That trifecta you spoke about, when those three things, audience, message, and storyteller, come together, it is the most powerful thing. And like the most powerful experience I've ever had in the theatre was watching a play called The Normal Heart at the National Theatre by Larry Kramer. It's an amazing. I like if I was ever to recommend a play to people, it's always The Normal Heart and Angels in America.
cool.
It's a play that was written at the height of the sort of like at the start of the HIV/AIDS epidemic by an amazing gay writer called Larry Kramer. He was an activist, and the play was sort of semi-autobiographical about what he and his group of mates, who then went on to found ACT UP, which was the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, this activist group. It was about their struggles, trying to be seen, trying to be heard. They're like this amazing doctor, this woman who helped fight to get visibility for gay men and what was happening, like under Reagan, where he was completely ignoring it, and Thatcher in the UK, where they were like, well, it's the gay plague, whatever, it's wiping these people out. The play is so powerful, but I went to watch it, the whole cast was queer. Nearly the group of people I went to watch it with, everyone was gay. The whole audience, you could tell there was a lot of queer people in that night. And there's a moment towards the end of the play where like a character dies. It's very, very emotional. I even talk about it, I can like feel it coming back. There's like moments throughout the whole play you could like hear ripples in the audience. It was in the Olivier as well. It's massive space, and at the end it was like a Mexican wave of emotion that you could just feel at this moment when this pink triangle came up on stage, which was the symbol that the Nazis made gay people wear when they went to the concentration camps. And it was this moment like paralleling that, the institutional murder of queer people. And it was right towards the end of the play, and this moment happens, and it was complete, like you could hear a pin drop in the audience. And I heard this noise, I was like, what is that? It's like, it was really loud. And it was someone wailing, like sobbing vocally. And then it just went around the whole theatre. Like you couldn't see it, but you could feel it, just this like wave. And the second it hit me, like, oh my God, like everything came out, all this emotion that I didn't know I was carrying. And it was about sharing a story on stage. It was the storytelling that was really powerful. The storytellers all being queer, being in an audience of people who are queer. That trifecta and like connecting in that way was something that I never realised I was missing. Of like seeing that on stage, sharing it with people who understand it by words from a storyteller who has lived it. And it's like, I think still to this day, like if I can ever be part of a moment like that in the audience, as a writer, as an actor, of creating that pure of a response, like, job done.
Yeah, that's the aim, that's the aspiration, to be able to touch people so viscerally.
Viscerally.
Yeah.
It's like you can't quite it's like this weird alchemy. You can't explain how it happened, but it's just like it's there. It's that thing after you watch a play. You don't necessarily remember lines, or you remember moments and feelings. Like, what do we say when we come out of a film? You're like, oh my God, it made me feel that moment when that bit.
Yeah.
You don't go like, oh, that line, or I love that. You remember the feeling.
You remember the feeling. It's the same when I was talking about that book. I can't remember the exact words or whatever that they talked about. I just remember the feeling that it gave me of just like euphoria and release and wanting to reach out to other people and start talking, stop being introverted, or not to connect with myself in a more loving kind of way, so I could connect with other people in a more loving kind of way too.
And
what were we going to say?
and that feeling, I feel like feeling is everything. We think about things so much, like you said on one of the episodes, we think about things and feel too little. And I feel like theatre, film, art as a just a concept or a thing we live, it's just feeling. You look at a painting, you feel the painting. You don't think about the painting. You can think about it and feel, but the feeling comes first. It always comes first. So when the thinking comes before the feeling in other aspects of life, it can affect you in ways that aren't necessarily healthy. Whereas if you feel and don't try and explain that feeling, like when you talk about the feeling you felt, you can't really explain it.
Yeah.
It's just there, and you know it's there, and it's just there, and that's okay. And like when we're all in scenes and we're all acting, sometimes you don't know what's going on. Well, you shouldn't know what's going on. It just sort of like affects you, and you go like, where's this coming from? This came out of nowhere. You triggered me in such a way, or I've triggered you in such a way that you're sobbing, or whatever you're doing. It's so human. And that's the message, that if anything gets taken away from like what I've said, art is just humanity. That's all it is.
Yeah. It's those golden nuggets of acting that I feel like for me, it's why I still act.
Yeah.
Because obviously, like, once you've had your first job, you're like, I've done my dream job. The reason I feel like I keep going is because they're so few and far between. Like, I've probably had it twice in my whole life of acting where you completely lose yourself to feeling.
Yeah.
You get to the end of a take or the end of a scene and you go, oh, Gabriel, I wasn't there for a moment. Like, the character took over. Sounds like a dead wanky thing to say, but it's like it's
true.
The thing we aim for as acting is to lose our sense of self and is to lean into the emotion of the character. And when you get those moments where, like you're saying, you go, oh my God, you made me feel something. Because what we're doing isn't real. We're just creating moments. We're creating feelings. When you get that moment, which are so rare, but where you completely go, I've completely, like, whatever it was, and I can't describe how I did it.
The nest.
Yeah.
And you feel it when you watch it as well. Like, I remember watching a film recently. I can't remember what the film was, but there was a scene, and I was just chilling. I was just watching it. I wasn't like, there wasn't anything that was like really affecting me. And all of a sudden, this shock happens, and I just felt my heart drop and the emotions rise, and I just felt this wave of sadness come over me from this one scene. And then watching it back again, seeing the same effect happen again, and realizing that the authenticity of the actor whose emotions we were allowed to see, that triggered us in such a way, that triggered me in such a way, because it was so human, and you connect with it. And I think as well, when you can relate to something as well, it makes it even more powerful, because you feel like you're not alone. And in a world where a lot of people have friends but are still very lonely, it's a really nice feeling to feel like you've got someone, even though it's a film or even though it's a play.
Someone who understands.
Yeah, someone who understands. And yeah,
that's the power of a good story, is like that moment in the theatre. Like, not everyone in that audience would have been queer, but everyone felt it. And that's when you understand that actually, like, we are all human. We're all sharing stories together, but actually we all feel together. Our hearts beat together. And that is why I think being an actor, being a storyteller, is probably the most powerful thing you can do for me. I know that's why I want to do it. It's because I know that it has the power to change lives, because it has the power to show people that we are all human.
What advice would you give to the younger, aspiring storytellers?
Read as much as you can. Read the best plays ever. Watch the best plays ever. And also watch terrible things. If you can ask someone to, like, what's the worst film ever? Watch things like, for me as an actor and as a writer and a director, it's good to know what doesn't work, but like, learn your tastes. Like, the best thing I did was download a list from like IMDb of the best films of all time, just make my way through them. Films that you would never usually go and watch, films that you wouldn't usually be drawn to, like, understand why other people say they're good. Like, I knew very early on that my lane was sci-fi. That's what I loved. So like, at uni, I forced myself to do modules way far away from that. As a writer, like, I'm only now writing my first ever thing in sci-fi, because I feel like I couldn't do that. I couldn't touch it until I'd done other genres first. I think really, like, push yourself. The more you can stretch yourself as a performer, as a person, as a storyteller, the better. But also, like, not just about acting, but like go to museums, go and look at artwork, and like you were saying before, like if you look at something and like understand how it makes you feel, just like feel as much as possible. Like go, just people watch. You'll feel every day if you let yourself go to life and try and bottle that in your work. That's the hard bit that I don't think anyone's figured out, but that's why we carry on going.
I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks very much for coming on, dude.
Thank you very much
for having me.
me.
So much, man.
It's been a
Wow.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
What an episode. And that's a
Feel.
wrap.
It's a wrap.
Feel more.